Good morning and welcome to Infinite Coffee with Michael and Deanne Goss. Thank you for joining us as we explore our infinite nature and gain practical understanding of how to utilize more of our infinite potential. To learn more about these concepts or just to connect with us, please visit infiniteceo.com. That's infiniteceo.com. And we have our coffee, we have a great book, and now we have you. Today we are continuing the Dore Lectures on Mental Science by Thomas Troward. We are reading Chapter 2, Individuality. Individuality is the necessary complement of the universal spirit. The whole problem of life consists in finding the true relation of the individual to the universal originating spirit. And the first step towards ascertaining this is to realize what the universal spirit must be in itself. We have already done this to some extent, and the conclusions we have arrived at are that the essence of the spirit is life, love, and beauty. That its motive or primary moving impulse is to express the life, love, and beauty which it feels itself to be. That the universal cannot act on the plane of the particular except by becoming the particular. That is, by expression through the individual. If these three axioms are clearly grasped, we have got a solid foundation from which to start our consideration of the subject for today. And before we go any further, this reminds me of Genesis chapter 1, where it says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let him have dominion." It goes through a number of different things, but it's let us make man in our image after our likeness. And one of the things that he says here that stuck out to me, that the universal, God in this case, cannot act on the plane of the particular or as an individual except by becoming the particular, that is, by expression through the individual. And I believe that's why he said, let us make man in our image, something through which we, God, can express itself individually. And the interesting thing about that is it can be done in a multiple of ways. If you think about it, there are no two ways, there's no one way to express God through the individual. There are an infinite number of ways that God expresses himself through the individual. And you say, well, we all, kind of look similar, and we have, maybe the skin color's a little different, eyes, and there's a number of different genetic distinctions between people. There are a lot of similarities. I think we're basically 99% the same, but there are uniquenesses to every individual that's a different expression of God. Once again, expressing life, love, and beauty. And so God couldn't do it individually unless there was an individual through which to do it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So the first question that naturally presents itself is, if these things be so, why does not every individual express the life, love, and beauty of the universal spirit? The answer to this question is to be found in the law of consciousness. We cannot be conscious of anything except by realizing a certain relation between it and ourselves. It must affect us in some way. Otherwise, we are not conscious of its existence. And according to the way in which it affects us, we recognize ourselves as standing related to it. It is this self-recognition on our own part carried out to the sum total of all our relations, whether spiritual or intellectual or physical, that constitutes our realization of life. On this principle, then, for the realization of its own livingness, the production of centers of life, through its relation to which this conscious realization can be attained, becomes a necessity for the originating mind. Now, what he's basically saying there is, unless we recognize what we've already read, unless we recognize that A, there is a God, that B, He wants to express life, love, and beauty. And then C, we are expressions of that and vehicles through which he can express himself. If we don't recognize that, if we don't have a conscious awareness, once again, we are a spirit, we have a soul, we live in a body, and that mental part of us, there's two parts of it. There's the conscious mind, and then there's the subconscious and or the unconscious mind. Some call it the non-conscious mind. But basically, there's a part of us that operates on autopilot. Some people refer to that as the God part of us. And that part, I believe, does have awareness naturally of its connection to the originating mind or to the originating spirit or to God. And the issue is not that. It's our conscious mind. If we're not consciously aware of this, then we have no relationship with it. We can only relate to something that we're consciously aware of. If I did not know or believe that you were here, I wouldn't be able to relate to you at all, because I wouldn't even know to relate to you, because you don't exist in my world. I'm not consciously aware of your existence. And so this realization is a critical part of the process, and that's something that each individual has to come to the conclusion for themselves. That's one of the things that cannot be forced onto another person. I can't make you believe something that you don't want to believe or you choose not to believe. I can't make you aware of something that you choose to be oblivious to, or vice versa. And that's why ultimately we have to become aware of this and develop this individually. All right. Then it follows that this realization can only be complete where the individual has perfect liberty to withhold it. For otherwise, no true realization could have taken place. For instance, let us consider the working of love. Love must be spontaneous, or it has no existence at all. We cannot imagine such a thing as mechanically induced love. It's kind of like the guy that, his wife looks at him and she says, you never bring me flowers anymore. When we were dating, you used to bring me flowers all the time. And then 45 minutes later, you hear that knock on the door. Yeah, and he's got some flowers Uber delivered to her, and it has no impact because that was forced. It was mechanical in his existence. So love needs to be spontaneous, but anything which is formed so as to automatically produce an effect without any volition of its own is nothing but a piece of mechanism. Hence, if the originating mind is to realize the reality of love, it can only be by relation to some being which has the power to withhold that love. The same applies to the realization of all other modes of livingness, so that it is only in proportion as the individual life is an independent center of action, with the option of acting either positively or negatively, that any real life has been produced at all. The further the created thing is from being a merely mechanical arrangement, the higher is the grade of creation. The solar system is a perfect work of mechanical creation, but to constitute centers which can reciprocate the highest nature of the divine mind requires not a mechanism, however perfect, but a mental center which is in itself an independent source of action. Hence, by the requirements of the case, man should be capable of placing himself either in a positive or a negative relation to the parent mind, from which he originates. Otherwise, he would be nothing more than a clockwork figure. In this necessity of the case, then, we find the reason why the life, love, and beauty of the spirit are not visibly reproduced in every human being. They are reproduced in the world of nature, so far as a mechanical and automatic action can represent them, but their perfect reproduction can only take place on the basis of a liberty akin to that of the originating spirit itself, which therefore implies the liberty of negation as well as of affirmation. Why then does the individual make a negative choice? Because he does not understand the law of his own individuality, and he believes it to be a law of limitation instead of a law of liberty. He does not expect to find the starting point of the creative process reproduced within himself, and so he looks to the mechanical side of things for the basis of his reasoning about life. Consequently, his reasoning lands him in the conclusion that life is limited, because he has assumed limitation in his premises, and so logically cannot escape from it is his conclusion. Then he thinks that this is the law, and so ridicules the idea of transcending it. He points to the sequence of cause and effect, by which death, disease, and disaster hold their sway over the individual, and says that sequence is law. And he is perfectly right as far as he goes. It is a law, but not the law. When we have only reached this stage of comprehension, we have yet to learn that a higher law can include a lower one so completely as entirely to swallow it up. The fallacy involved in this negative argument is the assumption that the law of limitation is essential in all grades of being. It is the fallacy of the old shipbuilders as to the impossibility of building iron ships. What is required to get at the principle, which is at the back of the law in its affirmative working, and specialize it under higher conditions than are spontaneously presented by nature. And this can only be done by the introduction of the personal element. That is to say, an individual intelligence capable of comprehending the principle. The question then is, what is the principle by which we came into being? And this is only a personal application of the general question. How did anything come into being? Now, as I pointed out in the preceding article, the ultimate deduction from physical science is that the originating movement takes place in the universal mind and is analogous to that of our own imagination. And as we have just seen, the perfect ideal can only be that of a being capable of reciprocating all the qualities of the originating mind. Consequently, man, in his inmost nature, is the product of the divine mind, imaging forth an image of itself on the plane of the relative as the complementary to its own sphere of the absolute. Once again, let us make man in our image after our likeness. The divine mind imaging forth an image, right?
Of himself.
Of himself. And that's us.
That's it, right.
Man, that's good coffee. Thank you. If we will therefore go to the inmost principle in ourselves, which philosophy and scripture alike declare to be made in the image and likeness of God, instead of to the outer vehicles which it externalizes as instruments through which to function on the various planes of being, we shall find that we have reached a principle in ourselves which stands in loco dei towards all our vehicles and also towards our environment. It is above them all and creates them, however unaware we may be of the fact, and relatively to them it occupies the place of first cause. The recognition of this discovery of our own relation to the world of the relative. Now, on the other hand, this must not lead us into the mistake of supposing that there is nothing higher. For as we have already seen, this inmost principle or ego is itself the effect of an antecedent cause, for it proceeds from the imaging process of the divine mind. We thus find ourselves holding an intermediate position between true first cause on the one hand and the world of secondary causes on the other. And in order to understand the nature of this position, we must fall back on the axiom that the universal can only work on the plane of the particular through the individual. Then we see that the function of the individual is to differentiate the undistributed flow of the universal into suitable directions for starting different trains of secondary causation. Man's place in the cosmic order is that of a distributor of the divine power, subject, however, to the inherent law of the power which he distributes. We see one instance of this in ordinary science, in the fact that we never create force. All we can do is to distribute it. The very word man means distributor or measurer, as in common with all words derived from the Sanskrit root mn. It implies the idea of measurement, just as in the words moon, month, men's, mind, and man. The Indian weight of 80 pounds, and it is for this reason that man is spoken of in Scripture as a steward or dispenser of the divine gifts. As our minds become open to the full meaning of this position, the immense possibilities and also the responsibility contained in it will become apparent. It means that the individual is the creative center of his own world. Our past experience affords no evidence against this, but on the contrary, is evidence for it. Our true nature is always present, only we have hitherto taken the lower and mechanical side of things for our starting point, and so have created limitation instead of expansion. And even with the knowledge of the creative law, which we have now attained, we shall continue to do this, if we seek our starting point in the things which are below us, and not in the only thing which is above us, namely the divine mind, because it is only there that we can find illimitable creative power. Life is being. It is the experience of states of consciousness, and there is an unfailing correspondence between these inner states and our outer conditions. Now, we see from the original creation that the state of consciousness must be the cause, and the corresponding conditions the effect, because at the starting of creation, no conditions existed, and the working of the creative mind upon itself can only have been a state of consciousness. This then is clearly the creative order, from states to conditions. But we invert this order and we seek to create from conditions to states. We say, if I had such and such conditions, then we would produce the state. If I had such and such conditions, they would produce the state of feeling which I desire. And in so saying, we run the risk of making a mistake as to the correspondence. For it may turn out that the particular conditions which we are fixed on are not such as would produce the desired state. Or, again, though they might produce it in a certain degree, other conditions might produce it in a still greater degree, while at the same time opening the way to the attainment of still higher states and still better conditions. Therefore, our wisest plan is to follow the pattern of the parent mind and make mental self-recognition our starting point, knowing that by the inherent law of spirit, the correlated conditions will come by a natural process of growth. Then the great self-recognition is that of our relation to the Supreme Mind. That is the generating center, and we are distributing centers. Just as electricity is generated at the central station and delivered in different forms of power by reason of passing through appropriate centers of distribution. So that in one place it lights a room, in another conveys a message, and in a third drives a car. In like manner, the power of the universal mind takes particular forms through the particular mind of the individual. It does not interfere with the lines of his individuality, but works along them, thus making him not less, but more of himself. It is thus not a compelling power, but an expanding and illuminating one, so that the more the individual recognizes the reciprocal action between it and himself, the more full of life he must become. Then also we need not be troubled about future conditions, because we know that the all-originating power is working through us and for us, and that according to the law proved by the whole existing creation, it produces all the conditions required for the expression of the life, love, and beauty which it is, so that we can fully trust it to open the way as we go along. The great teacher's words, take no thought for tomorrow. And note that the correct translation is, take no anxious thought for tomorrow, are the practical application of the soundest philosophy. This does not, of course, mean we're not to exert ourselves. We must do our share in the work and not expect God to do for us what he can only do through us. We are to use our common sense and natural faculties in working upon the conditions now present. We must make use of them as far as they go, but we must not try and go further than the present things require. We must not try to force things, but allow them to grow naturally, knowing that they are doing so under the guidance of the all-creating wisdom. Following this method, we shall grow more and more into the habit of looking to mental attitude as the key to our progress in life, knowing that everything else must come out of it. And we shall further discover that our mental attitude is eventually determined by the way in which we regard the divine mind. Then the final result will be that we shall see the divine mind to be nothing else than life, love, and beauty. Beauty being identical with wisdom, or the perfect adjustment of parts to the whole. And we shall see ourselves to be distributing centers of these primary energies, and so in our turn, subordinate centers of creative power. And as we advance in this knowledge, we shall find that we transcend one law of limitation after another by finding the higher law, of which the lower is but a partial expression, until we shall see clearly before us as our ultimate goal, nothing less than the perfect law of liberty. Not liberty without law, which is anarchy, but liberty according to law. In this way, we shall find that the apostle spoke the literal truth when he said that we shall become like him when we see him as he is. Because the whole process by which our individuality is produced in one of reflection of the image existing in the divine mind. When we thus learn the law of our own being, we shall be able to specialize it in ways of which we have hitherto but little conception. But as in the case of all natural laws, the specialization cannot take place until the fundamental principle of the generic law has been more fully realized. For these reasons, the student should endeavor to realize more and more perfectly, both in theory and practice, the law of the relation between the universal and the individual minds. It is that of reciprocal action. If this fact of reciprocity is grasped, it will be found to explain both why the individual falls short of expressing the fullness of life, which the spirit is, and why he can attain to the fullness of that expression. Just as the same law explains why iron sinks in water and how it can be made to float. It is the individualizing of the universal spirit by recognizing its reciprocity to ourselves that is the secret of perpetuation and growth of our own individuality. So once again, to truly start to gain the first level of conception or consciousness. And when we say consciousness, I can remember, when I was younger, I'd hear that term consciousness, and I thought, that's just something from the 60s, or it's all woo-woo, and, higher forms of consciousness, and all of that was, smoke LSD or something, or I don't know if they smoke it, or however they did dropped acid, and they would go on these to expand their consciousness. And really, once again, that is just a reference to what we are aware of in our conscious mind. Like right now, we're here, and I'm aware of my surroundings. I'm aware of you being here, and the dogs and the cat, and I'm aware of the camera and everything else that we've got, and I'm aware of what's outside. I'm consciously aware of those things. And also in my mind, I'm consciously aware of lots and lots of other things. And so when I set about to visualize something, like one of the things that we're working on as we continue to expand our property here, is we're continuing to expand out additional buildings and facilities and more places for kids to play and do things of that nature. Well, as we visualize that, that is, in a sense, a conscious activity. I am becoming more and more consciously aware of things the more often I spend time visualizing. Like today, I was spending time over in a room that we're going to expand. And so I started becoming more consciously aware of the details that are going to be involved in that process, the extension of the roof and what that's going to require in terms of support, because it needs to support, a second story and things of that nature. Well, I wasn't consciously aware of that yesterday. We just talked about it yesterday. I was consciously aware of one level of it, but it was kind of just a picture. It was kind of fuzzy, a little, if you will. And so today, as I spent more time making myself more consciously aware of everything involved in it, I started to see things I didn't see before. I am now consciously aware of those things. My consciousness has been expanded, and I didn't have to drop acid to do it. I just needed to spend time and really consider and remove limitations on what is possible, because at the end of the day, all things are possible. We can do and have anything that we want, but we can only have the things that we're consciously aware, that we want, and consciously aware that we can actually have them. So becoming more conscious in this manner is just about opening our minds and being aware of more things. So another way of saying conscious is just be awareness. I'm more aware of things. And so the first step in this is to become aware, or to be conscious of the fact that God, the Creator, created us in His image. And He created us to be able to use. Now, this is where a lot of people get it wrong, I think. It's not that we have God's power. It's not that. It's that we can use that power. We are, as Troward correctly points out, we are merely a distributor of that power. We don't generate or create any power in and of ourselves, right? All we can do is make use of it. Mm-hmm. Just like I don't generate any of the electrical power that's used here in our house. That comes from the utility company. It comes from all those solar panels on the barn. I mean, that's not for me. But I have learned how to make phenomenal use of electricity. We can use it for all kinds of things. We can use it to create power. We can use electricity to make more electricity if we wanted to. And so we can use that power in any way that we see fit, as long as we follow the laws of electricity. If we don't follow the laws of electricity, it won't work. Or, number two, it'll hurt us. Could potentially damage us. That's a lot of power. If we don't understand how to use it, it can actually do damage. And so, but our first part of this process is, I have to recognize that. I have to become aware of it, and finally, I have to believe that. Now, I don't want to get too deep into this, because there are 5 neurological levels of change, and you could say they're just neurological levels. And at the bottom of the list is the environment, then we get to behavior, and then capabilities, and then our belief systems. And near the top, the last thing before we get to who we really are, is our identity. And it's not just the identity that's naturally present in us, it's the belief that we have of that identity. Because our identity, who God made us to be, that can't be changed. But whether or not we ever access that is totally dependent upon what we believe our identity to be. And that belief in that identity comes from the awareness, A, that it's possible, and then B, that I can do that. And I have to believe it before I can see it. I have to believe it before I can act on it. And the belief is the predicate knowledge, or the predicate awareness or consciousness. It's the predicate consciousness required for me to take that action, because I will not take an action on something that I don't believe in. I mean, who's going to walk out onto that tightrope if they don't have a belief in its ability to hold them up? No one is going to do that. That would be crazy. So that's the first step in the process here. And so the more we understand that, the more we start to realize that I am merely a distributor. And what gets in the way of distributing that power? What gets in the way of distributing the power to bring life? Well, anything that is antithetical to life, anything that's antithetical to beauty, anything that's antithetical to God himself.
Yeah, and if we don't understand the intended relationship, that's what I think he did a really good job in this chapter, breaking down to day one, thought one from Spirit saying, let us make man in our image. From there, from the very first thought of that was the relationship that was intended. And if we don't understand the proper relationship between us and God, me and Spirit, then without that foundation, then it's very easy to go to, like he talks about, mechanical causes and what we see and conditions versus living in life in beauty. So it's a misunderstanding. Man has over time developed this misunderstanding between man and God, man and our Creator. So if we get off on that wrong foot, that's where it can go downhill.
It goes sideways, because now we start to look at it and we realize that, or we think, and this is what he was talking about, we start looking at the conditions and thinking of the conditions as necessarily dictating to us what we can and cannot do.
And then it's like, oh, well, that's God's fault. God must not like me. God, he has smiteth me.
Almighty smiter. Yeah. That's right.
And so over time, and just the way man thinks about God, or has, is he's scary and we must appease him. And from day one, that was not the intention. So somewhere along the line, the fall, if you will, that's exactly what happened. We had a wrong way of thinking and a wrong connection and relationship with Spirit that, like you said, took us sideways.
And that's been the challenge that we've had from the beginning. And so that's one of the things I really appreciate about how Troward writes this. Once again, he's writing it to a secular group. He's writing it to a secular audience, not writing it to a Christian or a Bible-believing audience necessarily. And so he uses terminology that's not what we found or what we've heard in growing up in churches all over the place. So he uses terms like first cause. He uses terms like divine mind. He doesn't use the term Holy Spirit or God or Jehovah or any of the other names that the Bible would potentially call him. But he's referring to the same things in the same process. And so I appreciate also bringing about the scientific element and or the logical elements to how these things actually work themselves out. And so this seems like another great place to stop for today. Next time, we're going to pick it up with Chapter 3 of the Dore Lectures on Mental Science by Thomas Troward, The New Thought and the New Order. Now, as always, we'd love to hear from you, so please feel free to drop us a comment. We'd also love it if you would like this show and give us a 5-star rating. Now, if you'd like to learn more, visit infiniteceo.com. That's infiniteceo.com. Thank you again for joining us here on Infinite Coffee. We'll see you next time.